Like computers and mobile phones, it seems that the European Union has always been there, fitting seamlessly into our lives. It was in fact as recently as 1950 that the French Foreign Minister Robert Schuman first presented a proposal for the creation of a united Europe, stating it was indispensable to the maintenance of peaceful relations. The original impetus for the founding of what was later to become the European Union was the desire to rebuild Europe after World War II. Winston Churchill had given a speech in 1946 calling for greater European integration, as a direct result of which the Council of Europe was formed. In 1951, the European Coal and Steel Community was founded by Belgium, West Germany, France, Italy, Luxembourg and the Netherlands. Britain was invited to join, but refused on the grounds of national sovereignty. The success of the ECSC led to these 6 founding states extending the scope of the existing treaty and forming the European Economic Community, later simply the European Community. Britain, not wishing to harm its trade with the Commonwealth, established an alternative organisation, the European Free Trade Association. As European trade grew, Britain decided it was in its economic interest to join the community. Its application was twice vetoed by France, until finally, in 1973, the existing 6 members agreed to Britain's admission. Spain was to join in 1986, and here we see the first direct effect on the ROC as she opened the frontier as a prerequisite. Today, the power struggle is intensified. There are 10 more countries entering the Union. Who will take the reins? Will Britain need to join the Euro so as to follow all the club rules? And setting the rules at the heart of the Union is the European Commission. Its role to initiate community policy and represent the Union's general interests. It serves as a guardian of the EU treaties and ensures European legislation is applied correctly. Although the 20 commissioners swear an oath of independence, their work is carried out in close partnership with the governments of the member states, with the Commission asked to play the honest broker between the sometimes conflicting interests. Legislative decisions are taken by the Council and Parliament, which has the power to dismiss the Commission by a vote of censure or no confidence. Gibraltar hears a lot of the Commission, especially when Spain acts as a whistleblower or is merely up to her old tricks, making sure she's heard in Brussels. Can Gibraltar continue to meet the challenges thrown by Spain's constant and noisy objections? Gibraltar's situation is not made any easier by the fact that Spain is Britain's natural ally in Europe. No surprise then that Blair and us now embarked on joint sovereignty negotiations as Britain tried to keep her friends sweet. But is that still the case? Or is Britain now cozying up to France and Germany? And will Spain be left in the cold as a result? And where does all this leave Gibraltar? At the end of the day, is the great European adventure something that local historians in the future will deem to have helped or hindered the ROC's quest for its own identity? Ironically, recent pronouncements from the Commission suggest that from Europe's point of view, Gibraltar simply represents a region of Great Britain, an intriguing echo of the integrationist sentiments of the 1970s. Certainly, it can't be denied that Spain's membership of the Union led directly to the semi-normalization of the frontier. On the debit side, however, Gibraltar pays the price of constantly being cast as a stone in the shoe of Anglo-Spanish relations, as our politicians face the exhausting task of defending the ROC's interests in the deluge of European legislation and in the face of apparent British indifference. Could this prove to be too high a price to pay? Good evening and welcome to Viewpoint. That introduction must have given you a fair idea of what the programme is going to be about. Gibraltar's relationship with the European Union. Plenty to discuss, and here in the studio to discuss it with me is Liberal Party leader Dr. Joseph Garcia, Barrister Nick Gruss, who's also executive member of the GST, three barristers, Barrister Gilbert Ligudi, executive member of the GSLP, and Labour Party leader Daniel Feetham. Good evening. I think you've certainly watched that, and I think the question that has come up recently is, can Gibraltar afford to stay in the European Union? And Danny, in your New Year message, and I'm going to start with you, you actually say that the government is right to question how long we can continue putting up with the burdens without the benefits.
Well, no, what I said was that there may come a time when the burdens of EU membership are such that we may have to have a debate about whether Gibraltar wants to stay within the European Union or whether it doesn't. I happen to think that when the debate, if the debate arises, that that people will nonetheless vote for or support Gibraltar's staying within the European Union. I don't think we've reached that stage. The European Union is an important source of wealth for Gibraltar. It's an important source of rights for individuals. People in Gibraltar, individuals, have the right to move within the European Union, to work within any country within the European Union. In terms of financial services, which accounts for 30% of GDP, Gibraltar derives substantial benefits from the single market. We've got passporting rights in investment services, in banking, in insurance services. In insurance, we've just, over the last 18 months, insurance companies, a number of insurance companies, gone up from, I think it is 13 to about 39. And that's an important source of jobs for people in Gibraltar. So I don't think that anybody in their right mind would in fact question Gibraltar's permanence within the European Union at this particular stage.
Gilbert.
I certainly agree with Daniel that we, in answer to the question, should we stay in, the answer is most definitely yes. On balance, Daniel has highlighted some of the balancing factors that have to be taken into account, but on balance we certainly have more benefits than burdens. Sometimes we perceive that we don't get a level playing field, a fair and level playing field, and that is sometimes true, that we are excluded from certain measures when we see that that is unfair and that should not be the case. But certainly we do derive substantial benefits from membership. Daniel has mentioned passporting. That was a long and drawn-out battle. Eventually we got passporting rights for banks, insurance companies and investment services in Gibraltar. Essentially, that allows Gibraltar-based licensees to passport into Europe and to either establish a branch or bricks and mortar presence or to sell their services in Europe based in Gibraltar. Given that Europe is expanding and is becoming an ever-expanding market, now with 10 more members, the market for Gibraltar companies and Gibraltar entities is getting ever bigger, and that is an important source of revenue for Gibraltar. There is also an issue to be considered in looking at whether we should stay in or out. We've got, as we know, a very hostile neighbour that seems to be intent on making our lives as difficult as possible. They sometimes succeed in doing that, notwithstanding our membership of Europe. Can you imagine how much worse it would be if we were out of Europe? There might be even a question mark as to whether the border would remain open. Let us recall that the border was only opened fully as a result of the impending entry by Spain into Europe. So they would certainly redouble their efforts to make our lives very difficult and increase the restrictions. So most certainly, on balance, we need to stay in.
Nick, you've heard their views, but of course the burdens are there. Can Gibraltar keep up with those burdens?
Well, I tend to echo what they've said in the sense that, I mean, the border opened because Spain would join the EU. I think we saw it with the Aurora. If any excuse they would have, they would close it. And I think if we weren't members of the EU, they would fabricate whatever excuse and use it to prevent access. I expect that would be one of the things that they'd certainly consider. So I think it's inevitable that we, at this stage, must remain in the EU. The problem, and I think the question is not so much whether we should stay in the EU, but how we manage ourselves within the EU, given that not just Spain, but it's continuous battle within the EU. Some of the times it's Spain using the EU as a weapon to manipulate or to pursue their sovereignty claim. On other occasions, it's a much more larger agenda, which perhaps is an EU-driven agenda, whether it's on taxation or something else. So I think the question is how we can steer our way through our membership, given the rather small sort of punching power that we have in the European Union, given our size, really, primarily, and the fact that at the end of the day, the UK interest in the European Union don't always coincide with ours, and I think that's really the fundamental question: is how we can stay in the EU with our rights being recognised.
Joseph, certainly a lot of challenges ahead. We're going to be looking at these issues, but your opinion?
Well, if we're going to have a debate as to whether Gibraltar should stay within the European Union or should leave the European Union, then I think the first point that needs to be made is that we better make that decision quickly and have that debate. Because what seems to be quite clear now is that if the new treaty comes into effect, and if the new treaty is agreed, and if the existing wording is carried forward, we won't have a choice and we won't be able to leave the European Union. I think that's the first point that needs to be made. To have the debate, then we need to have it quickly and we need to have it now, because then after that, if things stay as they are, we will not be able to get out unless the UK also gets out. The second point, which I think it is important to make at this stage, is that we cannot keep on repeating the same mistakes again and again when it comes to the European Union, when it comes to our relations with Europe, with Spain and with the United Kingdom. Because that is the travesty, if you like, of the way in which Gibraltar's political relations have evolved in that context in the past. And I mean, just to give you an example, when Spain applies to join the European Union in July 1977, so from July 1977, we know that Spain is going to join. They don't actually join until the 1st of January 1986. We have all those years to safeguard the position of Gibraltar in Europe before Spain joins. So what happens? Do we do anything about it? A committee set up, a UK and Gibraltar committee, after much deliberation, chaired by Sir Richard Hannay, who later became ambassador to the United Nations, British ambassador to the UN. The committee met a couple of times, and by the time anything had been decided, Spain had already joined. So I think it's extremely important to ensure that the position that we, well, I mean, to go back to the situation, the problems that we're having today, to put it this way, are essentially the problems that we have made for ourselves. When I say we, I obviously include the United Kingdom, by not safeguarding the position of Gibraltar adequately before Spain joined Europe.
Some of them couldn't have been envisaged, surely.
Sorry, but just to make matters even worse, you see, when Spain joins the Union in 1985, just after, within months of the signing of the Brussels Agreement, they then joined the Union with by sending including a diplomatic note to the United Kingdom, making it clear that their joining is first without prejudice to their claim on the sovereignty of Gibraltar, and secondly, that it's also without prejudice to the negotiating process began at Brussels a few months earlier. So really, not only do we not safeguard our position before Spain joins, but Spain actually safeguards hers. And I think that many of the problems we're experiencing today date back, can be traced back to the fact that we did not safeguard the position of Gibraltar before Spain joined Europe.
Let me just remind viewers that our lines are open if you want to join in the debate. The number is 79810. And a couple of things that I want to take you.
Joseph makes an important point here, because if we don't ensure that our position is protected vis-a-vis, I think that's really what he has in mind, the draft European treaty, then in fact this debate about whether we remain in Europe or we don't remain in Europe is largely academic, because one of the clauses in the draft constitution relates to countries, member states, leaving the European Union, and it places an obligation on all the other member states to negotiate with that member state favourable terms for secession. Now, the United Kingdom says that doesn't apply to a region of a member state. So in other words, it wouldn't apply to Gibraltar. So if that draft constitution is in fact ratified, whether we wanted to leave the European Union or we didn't want to leave the European Union, we couldn't. That's the point. Unless, of course, we declared independence. Now, we're told by the United Kingdom government that independence is out of the question. So that's why protecting our position now and ensuring...
How much say would we have in something like this, surely?
Well, yes, it's true. It's certainly true.
We are asking for the best of both worlds.
The government has a point when the government says, look, we are not at the negotiating table. It's the United Kingdom. But I certainly don't think that enough has actually been done to safeguard our position. You know, I talk to a lot of MPs, and it's surprising, in fact, the little information that MPs have about Gibraltar's position in relation to this. So certainly more could be done, and it hasn't. And I think, you know, I've said it in the past, I think that certainly the government has underestimated the extent of the challenge in relation to this. I say that, and I also say that, of course, the debate at the present moment is premature in the sense that I think one factor could possibly trigger the debate as to whether we stay within the European Union or we don't. and that is if the regional selectivity argument goes against Gibraltar, because if the regional selectivity argument goes against Gibraltar, effectively we would lose our fiscal independence, and if we lose our fiscal independence, we would lose a large part of our finance centre. And in fact, according to government calculations, its own expert evidence in the state aid case in 2001 against the Commission, that would lead to about from 3,000 to 4,000 job losses in Gibraltar. That's very, very serious.
It is important to note in relation to the draft constitution, which is being proposed, that what we're asking for essentially is that our present status be preserved. We're not asking for the earth. We're not asking for members to bend over backwards to accommodate us. We want our present status carried forward. Our present status in relation to the possibility of opt-out is that we have the ability to opt out of the European Union even if the UK as a member stays in. Under the present draft, that ability is lost, and that is something, although we do not presently contemplate the possibility of leaving, it is important. It is important to have that option open. In respect of keeping our present status, it is also important to carry over to whatever new arrangements are made the exemptions that we currently have. Particularly, we are outside the customs union and common agricultural policy, and a couple of other exemptions that we have. The draft constitution, the European Constitution, is silent on that. Now, we derive those exemptions from the Act of Accession with the UK, when the UK joined the European Constitution. As long as that Act of Accession remains in place, then we've got those exemptions safeguarded. We want to make sure that we have sufficient guarantees that the Act of Accession will not be repealed.
We've had assurances from the British government. What they haven't said is whether they'd actually veto, not sign it.
That's true. We've had assurances, we've had strong assurances from the British government, and there is no reason to doubt the honesty.
The question is how far they're prepared to go.
Well, yes, and also that if the eventual treaty that is, or constitution that is discussed and agreed on, changes our status in some way, we do not have an assurance that Britain will veto the signing of that constitution because it changes our status. That is important to achieve. We need to maintain our present status going forward.
Sorry, if I can come in. I think it's important to remember that the timescale isn't particularly good in terms of the EU constitution. I mean, in December, what didn't go through, but it was only 2 or 3 days ago that the French president was stating that he'd like to see the EU constitution through in this current presidency. So we're talking about from now till October, and there's been noises that the objectors to the progress of that, primarily Spain and other countries which would are being accommodated. So in terms of timescale, we don't have a lot of time in anything that we may wish to do. And there is a degree of reliance on the UK in the same way that Jersey and Guernsey have sought and obtained the same reliance. And I think primarily what we must remain is extremely vigilant over the next few months and do what we can to make sure that there isn't a deal done that would accommodate the UK and accommodate other countries where we perhaps are the sacrificial lamb, which is what's happened to us on other occasions.
Joseph, there are several issues raised on the dangers of the Constitution. Gibraltar's exclusion from measures that it wishes to participate in, principle of territorial integration, the demarcation of borders, and you actually mentioned taking the issues case by case to European Court of Justice.
The merger of the first and third pillar.
And how difficult, what sort of difficulties that would present us? So,
I think first of all, we need to establish what exactly is it that's happening here. And what's happening is that we're building a new Europe of 450 million Europeans, that is to say 75 million more people are coming into the European Union on the 1st of May, with 10 new countries that are joining the Union at that particular time. Now, what's happening is this: the Union needs structures and it needs institutions in order to work. The Treaty of Nice, to an extent, laid down what those institutions were, laid down, for example, how many new MEPs Malta would have, how many representatives on the Commission each country would have, etc. That's all in the Treaty of Nice. But they've realized that a Commission of 15 a community of 15 cannot work in the same way as a community of 25. And therefore they need to streamline the treaty, they need to make certain changes to ensure that it works properly and it works smoothly. And that is the process in which the European Convention, which met under Giscard d'Estaing, the former French president, for a couple of years, then produced this document in July, which is known as the draft constitutional text, which is what the leaders discussed at the Intergovernmental Conference in December, which collapsed because there was no agreement. Amongst other things, because one of the thorny issues is a question of qualified majority voting and how many votes each country gets when they sit around a table and they have to vote on an issue. So that is a broad picture. Now, obviously, with the changes that are taking place will affect Gibraltar. I mean, earlier last year, I think it was in May of last year, on the 19th of May, the President of Spain, Aznar, wrote to Blair saying that, look, he wanted to resume talks on the future of Gibraltar within the context of the institutional changes that were taking place in Europe. Now, that was made public in the media. We certainly don't know what reply Blair gave, except that the talks would continue, some kind of vague comment to that effect. So we know we have to be wary, and already in the many areas that have been identified by various people, including the government and including everybody who's looked at the treaties, we see that there are areas of serious concern. And we had pointed out areas in relation to borders and frontiers, for example, the question of territorial integrity, the first time that this has been mentioned in a treaty of the European Union as opposed to the UN resolutions. So there is a fear that the hand of Spain may be somewhere there in the background, manoeuvring things to their favour and to our detriment, as has happened so often in the past. I mean, we need to remember that during the negotiations leading up to the Treaty of Amsterdam, not that long ago, there were a couple of protocols which were unfavourable to Gibraltar at the time. They were known as Protocol X and Protocol Y. The names changed.
We heard a lot about
if you remember that. That's why I mentioned that, because I'm sure you remember it if I mentioned them in that way. Well, those protocols, we were told by the UK, were inserted by Spain into the treaty in the early hours of the morning when the British negotiators had either fallen asleep or gone out for a sandwich or whatever. And therefore, although they weren't there at the beginning of the negotiating process, they've sadly found themselves they were in and they couldn't take them out. That was the excuse that we were given. Frankly, it's a totally unacceptable excuse, and it shows how negligent the British government can be. But that is what they said at the time. We need to ensure that kind of thing does not happen again. And it would be, I mean, the government, for example, issued a position paper on the 11th of December last year where they highlighted a 10-page paper with 8 points that they felt were areas of concern. And they said what their view was and what the reply of the British government was, and then they gave a comment at the end. We don't accept that publishing correspondence, which is in effect what it amounts to, publishing extracts of correspondence, is actually enough. And then you can say, well, look, we've done all we can, that's the end of it, and that's what Britain has said, and we can't do anything more. We don't accept that. I mean, we certainly, the philosophy is that you shouldn't take no for an answer, and that therefore, if this is what the UK has said, then you carry on, you take it forward, you take it to our friends in Parliament, you take it to the Select Committee of the House of Commons, which has been very favourable, the Foreign Affairs Committee, to Gibraltar in recent years. So you certainly don't let the matter rest. And there are serious areas of concern. I mean, one of them we've been discussing, which is this question of whether we can leave the EU unless the UK leaves or not. Yes. The borders are other areas. The question of citizenship of the Union is another area. Well, all these things need to be ironed out, and we cannot really sit here, since the 11th of December when the document was published, saying, well, look, this is what the UK has said. Isn't it terrible of them?
But at the end of the day,
we
it
need
is
to
what
do something.
The UK
we need
has
to take
said,
action.
though.
I'm not disputing that. What I'm saying is that we cannot take that as being the final position.
Answer.
We need to push the issue. I mean, for example, if we'd taken the UK position on the Euro vote as being their final position, then we wouldn't be able to vote on the 10th of June. We would have done nothing about it. We need to exhaust all options. If those options are legal, if they are political, or if the two go hand in hand, then so be it. But we certainly cannot take the UK position as final, and if the hand of Spain is seen in many of these amendments, which it quite clearly is, I mean, some of them were proposed by Spain, we need to make sure that we counteract that in whatever way we can.
Gilbert, you mentioned having Spain as a neighbour, and I do want to point out the hand of Spain is very, very strong in Europe. I mean, Britain is stronger perhaps than Spain, but Spain just barks. She's loud and she's heard. You mentioned the Aurora. Spain just blamed Gibraltar for the Prestige and the Aurora. We've got issues that are sensitive to Gibraltar and we don't get heard, the border queues, telephones.
No, that's certainly true. That's all of that is true. And the problem is that Spain, when it draws its red lines, it makes sure that those lines remain very red indeed, and they stick by their position. Unfortunately, we have not seen the same from Britain on a number of measures. We've seen on the European Constitution, what we need primarily is absolute certainty and not ambiguity. If there is any scope for ambiguity, we know that Spain will try and take advantage of that to hurt us in any way possible. On the territorial scope, it is certainly comforting that Gibraltar is included within the territorial scope clause in the draft constitution, and therefore we are considered as an integral part of the territory of Britain. But the hand of Spain certainly is there all the time, and we've seen it on a number of occasions. Only recently, although this is something that dates back a few years, we saw the publication of a framework regulation by the Council and the European Parliament in December of last year relating to the single European sky, which deals with a unified air control system for the whole of Europe. Well, when this was originally proposed as a white paper in 2001 by the European Transport Commissioner, Loyola de Palacio, Britain's view was that Gibraltar had to be included within the provisions for the single European sky. Very shortly thereafter, when the Commission made a policy statement, Britain capitulated on Spain's insistence that we had to be left out. And that is regrettable, because that has now seen its way directly into the document that creates the framework regulation, which was published in December of last year. So we see a reversal of a position by the UK and Spain very firm in their position. Now, the government have said that they propose to take all legal avenues that are available in relation to that. What we've got to recall, and certainly an obstacle that we have to bear in mind in relation to this, is that the suspension of the single sky framework for Gibraltar is on the basis that until the 1987 airport agreement is implemented, those measures will not apply in Gibraltar. And as we know, that airport agreement was unanimously rejected by the House of Assembly, and the chances of that being implemented are zero. So we now have to challenge that exclusion on that basis. There is a historical view of something that has happened before, specifically in relation to an exclusion on the grounds of the airport agreement, and that happened when we were left out of the air liberalisation directive back in the 1980s, and the Gibraltar government actually took legal action in the European Court of Justice against the the Council of Europe. We lost that case, primarily on the basis that the court decided that there was an objective justification for that exclusion, and also that it was not a decision which was capable of being challenged. But the court said there was an objective justification, and that objective justification was the dispute between Britain and Spain over the rock. That is exactly the same as what arises now, and the legal challenge must take into account what was said at the time. We must also take into account that at the time, the UK actually argued against us in that case. It was us against the Council of Europe, but also against the UK, the Commission and Spain as interveners, all intervened against our arguments. And the UK was arguing primarily that Gibraltar government did not have the locus standi, the right to bring these proceedings, because this related to an international matter for which Britain was responsible, and therefore the Chief Minister of Gibraltar did not have the ability to give instructions on behalf of the Gibraltar government. That is an obstacle which we'll also face in any legal challenge which we mount now in
We'll
relation
talk
to
about
single
legal
sky.
challenges when we come back. Just a very short break. Welcome to Viewpoint. Welcome back. We're talking about legal avenues that Gibraltar can explore And talking of legal avenues and these tax reforms and the debate on regional selectivity, let's go on to that because that's a major issue that I do want to cover tonight.
Well, what has happened here essentially is that the government is required essentially to overhaul tax legislation in Gibraltar, which is currently based on exempt and qualifying legislation. And the government has put before the Commission a completely new tax system, and the Commission has, on a provisional basis, it has essentially.
Actually, sorry, Danny, but it should be answering this month, if my calculations are correct, because it did say.
No. What has actually happened is the government have put the proposals before the Commission. The Commission has then come back and said to the government already, on a provisional basis, that the proposals are state aid on the detail. In fact, it's picked out 14 specific points on the detail. In fact, I have the decision here. That's the decision. And said that on a provisional basis, they believe this is regional selectivity as well. The government has then gone back to the Commission and said, well, in actual fact, your reasons are not good reasons for whatever reasons the government have actually put forward, because we don't know, we haven't seen those submissions, and the Commission is to rule now formally, and we're expecting a formal ruling in March next year, in March of this year, next month. So that's the position that we're at the present moment. Although the detail, if for instance they come back and they say, no, we maintain that these 14 points are still state aid, they still amount to a subsidy to companies in Gibraltar on the detail. If that's the case, then the government of Gibraltar could material selectivity. Then the government of Gibraltar can change the tax proposals. We can put different proposals or implement different proposals in Gibraltar. It's the regional selectivity that's the problem, because regional selectivity would effectively mean fiscal integration with the United Kingdom, and it's the consequences of that. And that's where one would then have a debate in Gibraltar as to whether we want to remain in the European Union or we want to come out of the European Union. I happen to think that there is a second alternative, and that's the option of integration, because an awful lot of people here in Gibraltar would probably say, well, hang on a minute, if we are going to have fiscal integration with the United Kingdom, well, the obligation is on the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom has a constitutional obligation for financial stability of Gibraltar. We're in this mess because the United Kingdom is the member state. It's the United Kingdom that encouraged the development of the finance centre, which we would lose to offset MOD, the contraction of the MOD base. And therefore the United Kingdom has a moral and constitutional responsibility to offer integration to the people of Gibraltar, and perhaps even negotiate a phase out of our present system with the Commission. Those are the two options that would have been.
No, I don't agree.
Insult to
injury. I don't think.
Isn't it adding insult to injury? I mean, we're going to not allow you to carry on as you are, and then you're going to have to be a part of us.
Well, absolutely. I mean,
this is the.
Can I get Joseph in now?
But no, let me say that I don't think it's as simple as that. I think there's one huge problem there which you haven't identified, and the problem is this: that if we move Gibraltar from being an Article 2274 as it was under the Treaty of Rome to 994 as it is now territory,
explain that.
This means we are a European territory for whose external affairs a member state is responsible. I.e., we are not part of a member state, but a territory for whose external affairs they are responsible. If we move from there to being an Article 2991 territory, which is part of a member state.
This is like Star Wars.
Then, I know, I'm sorry, it's a complicated issue. But then what I'm saying is that if we change Gibraltar's status in Europe from under our existing terms of membership to new terms of membership where we are part of the UK member state, that is in treaty terms, moving from Article 2994 to 2991, then we're changing the EU treaty itself. That would need the consent of all the member states, including Spain. So I don't think that is a likely prospect. But can I just make one general point, because I think it's important, because we're discussing the way Gibraltar works in our relationship with the EU. The essential point, which we haven't really raised in this discussion yet, is that our constitution, the 1969 constitution, predates our entry into the European Union. So many of the problems also which we are experiencing with regards to Gibraltar and the United Kingdom, we're experiencing because we have a constitution that existed, that was drawn up and that was implemented before Britain and before Gibraltar joined Europe. And so what's happened? For example, the UK has argued in the past, and is still arguing in some cases, that defined domestic matters under the 1969 Constitution, financial services is one of them, are foreign affairs if they have a European Union impact. They're not domestic, they're not local domestic matters which are the responsibility of the United Kingdom, of the Gibraltar government, as opposed to the United Kingdom government. Now, that is a problem which we need to get round. I mean, that, apart from the wider issue, the local internal arrangement between us and the United Kingdom, which is not in any treaty, I mean, it's in our constitution, that also needs to be sorted out. Now, when the Select Committee was trying to get its head round this issue, we decided, well, let there be in Gibraltar and in the UK, we didn't say where, but a consultative council for EU matters between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom. It would have 3 members nominated by the Chief Minister of Gibraltar and 3 members nominated by the Secretary of State in the UK. All EU matters could be referred to that council by either side, and the council would have to emerge with a recommendation within 6 months. Secondly, the UK would have to accept, and because we really need to get this down in writing, the UK would have to accept that matters which are the defined domestic responsibility of the government of Gibraltar are not external affairs, that they are domestic affairs, and that the prime responsibility of the government here and not of the United Kingdom. I think that's one of the areas of dispute. And I think, we laid down this framework of an EU consultative council because we thought that was the best way in which to get the UK round the table to actually discuss issues, because sometimes they simply don't even want to discuss them.
Well, we discussed
and
that.
actually,
the
right.
people were saying that the UK...
But what I'm saying is that we also need a framework where these issues that we're raising here can be raised with the UK with a definite timescale, and not where the UK can drag on discussions for months and years on end and nothing happens. Now, what the Select Committee proposed was this particular route, having an EU consultative council for European Union affairs of this nature. That may or may not be the perfect solution. It's certainly the best one that we came up with, and I certainly think it's something which should be in the new constitution. It is in the new constitution, the draft constitution of Gibraltar. Obviously, we need to take that forward now in discussions with the United Kingdom. But it's certainly essential, not just that we sort out the wider position in relation to Europe, but also the internal arrangement and the internal workings of the constitutional setup between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom. And this is the framework or the forum which we proposed in which to do it.
I'd like to come in on that. I recall that committee, and in fact, at the time I gave evidence to that committee, it was a suggestion that I made that we had some consultative process.
That's right. Yes, you're right.
And this goes back to my point initially that the issue is not so much, at least I don't perceive it so much, as whether we're in or without Europe, or outside Europe, but more how do we live within it and how can we be vigilant. And it's in essence that inevitably results in us having a relationship with the United Kingdom and developing that relationship to have safeguards to ensure that they don't slip past us, in essence, either out of lack of attention, because ultimately, they're concerned with millions of people and not necessarily us, and we must remember that, yes, we aren't the most important thing to them, or in the context of a Spanish intervention. So having some formula that allows us to look after our own interest is fundamental, and having direct access to the Commission is also fundamental. And I think, before I touch on the regional selectivity point, one of the things that the new constitution, if only, might provide is a little bit of a safer system than the existing one. The existing relationship is based on horse trading. The commissioners are fundamentally, a lot of them are certainly not at all interested in any Gibraltar interest. By historical reasons, seem more interested in financial affairs and their own than anybody else's. And in that context, I don't think there's anybody there who looks after our interest. And in that, you talked about Spanish bark. It's in that context that the Spaniards have been so successful in manipulating. So a more democratic Europe, despite its pitfalls, may actually provide us in some ways with a bit of a safeguard. On the regional selectivity issue, if I can come in on that, I think we've got to look at the larger picture as well, because it may well be that Spain have an involvement in that, but the larger picture is that there's a large body of thought in Europe, and I have an article here from the Financial Times of just 2 days ago in which one of the commissioners was proposing, in essence, EU tax harmonizations. In the context of that, our own tax proposals obviously fly in the face of that for two reasons. One of the stages of the harmonization that they propose is a model for assessing your tax based on what are traditional methods, based on profits. And the second phase is a harmonization of the rates. Well, our present tax proposals obviously fly in the face of that because it rebuilds the basis upon which you're taxed. This is something which is not something which was fundamentally known in 2002 when we all discussed it, but it's certainly risen in importance in the last few years. And I think that any discussions as to where we go with our tax proposal has to be in the context of a wider European agenda and not just our relationship with Spain or whatever it is. And I think specifically, if I just may finish, one has to understand that the regional selectivity argument is, in my view at least, not something that holds substantial water, because at the end of the day,
I was going to ask you that.
Look, at the end of the day, it's been used primarily because the more technical side of our arguments have been successful to the extent the United Kingdom have supported them, have been successful to the extent the United Kingdom has recommended other jurisdictions to adopt them. The EU lawyers that we've sought advice from have approved them, and the Commission has not liked them, and they've looked for excuses to stop that. And it's in the context of that wider picture that we're now faced. Exactly, we're now faced with this, what is a political decision in the sense of regional selectivity, when anybody knows that we are clearly not part of the United Kingdom constitutionally, nor are we a region of the UK. So it's manipulation for political purposes and not necessarily an agenda with Spain. It might be a European agenda of harmonisation.
We've got a caller on the line, but Gilbert.
Yes, Christine, we've got to draw a distinction. There is a fundamental distinction between material selectivity and regional selectivity. If the objection is based on material selectivity, what the Commission would reject is the specific proposal.
We're back to the drawing board.
That is, but it means we just propose an alternative. Under regional selectivity, then basically what they're saying is we can't have any system at all which is different to the member state. Now, although Nick says that really runs contrary to the mood in Europe, it is a concept that is recognized that certain regions even within member states can be allowed to have different tax treatments.
Spain has a couple.
Spain
Germany
has a couple.
Scotland.
Madeira has recently, very recently,
in Portugal.
yes, Madeira has very recently had a scheme approved for the next few years, which is aimed basically at encouraging certain industries. The factors that the treaty allow should be taken into account: the small nature of the region, the need to improve certain industry, economic dependence on certain sectors, and we have economic dependence primarily on tourism and finance centre activity. So those are arguments which are well founded and really I think totally destroy the argument of regional selectivity. But your question initially is what we do about it. The alternative proposed by Daniel is, well, if we're going to have fiscal independence, integration, we might as well have...
No, what I've actually said is that if you have regional selectivity, which means fiscal integration, the debate in Gibraltar will then revolve around two options. That is, either leaving the European Union, which is the kite that the Chief Minister himself has flown in recent weeks, or alternatively, integration on the basis that we shouldn't have fiscal integration without the option of political integration. And that's certainly a legitimate and valid option for an awful lot of people to argue for in a situation where we have fiscal integration.
Well, it is certainly a different...
How do you change our status in Europe without the consent?
No, well, I don't actually agree with your analysis on legal terms, Joseph. I think that the constitutional relationship between ourselves and the United Kingdom is a matter between ourselves and the United Kingdom.
No, you're wrong.
And if we became a region of the United Kingdom, then
you're wrong. I mean,
that's my analysis. I'm not going to have
terminology.
I just spent a whole day in the Court of Appeal. I'm not going to have a legal argument with you on this today.
The actual terminology of our terms of entry into the European Union spell out that we are a European territory for whose external affairs a member state is responsible. If you make us part of the member state, then you have to move us from where we are from the third,
that is precisely
the third
the whole
one
premise
up to the fourth
of the
up to the
regional
first
selectivity
one.
argument.
When you move us up to the first one, then we are part of the member state UK. That means that exactly proves the point that I'm saying. It's not possible to make that change without the consent of Spain. So therefore, it cannot happen unless there is unanimity in the whole procedure approved by the Parliament and the Council, then each of the member states, and then finally that would include Spain.
Where does that leave your arguments? Where does it leave your arguments in relation? In relation to the European Treaty, which is that we should not accept a no for an answer, that we should be proactive rather than reactive. And the reality of the situation, the reality of the situation here,
would not, our terms of entry to the European Union do not have to change under the Select Committee proposal reports because we stay where we are. Okay. If we adopt that,
he's sidestepping the issue. If we have a regional selectivity finding, and I happen to think that we're not, but if we have a regional selectivity finding in Gibraltar, and we are faced with the loss of the finance centre, what is it that we do? Do we have academic arguments about Article 299? What is it that we do?
You should know.
What you're effectively, but you see, what you're effectively saying is that we just simply remain still.
No, Daniel, we're certainly.
Can we have you one at a time?
What you're saying is not possible. I'm sorry, Chris, what he's saying is simply not possible.
Okay,
you cannot change our status in the EU without moving us from the 4th to the 1st, and that would require the consent.
I think you agree to differ on that.
I think Joseph is right, but I'm surprised that Daniel would raise as the option the way out of the regional selectivity problem.
No, again,
the option.
I'm not saying that it's the option. I'm saying the debate would revolve
yes, that is one of the options which will have to be considered. Only very recently, what we had is Daniel arguing precisely the opposite, that we should have integration with Britain, but not fiscal integration. In other words, fiscal integration is something that we should retain. But the answer, if we have a problem, but Daniel, if we have a problem, if we have a problem with regional selectivity, the answer is to meet that challenge head-on and to take the Commission and the Council, if necessary, to the European Court of Justice. We have an important precedent in relation to tax reforms. We have already an important precedent because the government took the Commission to court 2 years ago and won on a technical point. But importantly, the court recognized that in relation to this issue, tax reforms, tax structure is a defined domestic matter in which the Gibraltar government has locus standi, has the right to take the Commission to court. And that analysis can be extended to any finding of regional selectivity, and we must pull out all the stops and prevent that from happening.
I want to take but you see, it's a misrepresenting of my position. I agree entirely that we have to fight tooth and nail any finding of regional selectivity. The point is, if the European Court of Justice, after a challenge, comes back and says regional selectivity applies, what is it that we do? We cannot stick our heads in the sand.
We've understood that's one of the options. Wilfred Lima, Mr. Lima, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting. Good evening.
Good evening. My question is, if we are decolonized, we're only left, in my judgment, with two options, reality. That is integration with Spain or integration with Britain. There's nothing else. And Britain has ruled out integration with Britain. So can we be independent?
Well, look, the United Kingdom has said very clearly over the years, I mean, going back to 1976 with the Hattersley Memorandum, that we're pushed in the direction of Spain and ruling out practically every other option for our decolonization. Now, our position is, right, we have had a select committee of the House of Assembly, and I suppose when I say I mean the House or the members of the committee or what have you, is that we've gone through soundings to the electorate, to people who wanted to come and give their views. Daniel gave them in writing, and Nick came and gave made oral representations. We've now drawn up a constitution for Gibraltar. There are four options which the United Nations allows for decolonization. Those options are free association, integration, independence, or the fourth option. The fourth option hasn't been defined. I mean, it could be devolved integration, which Daniel is advocating, or it could be whatever else you want to call it. But it includes the report of the Select Committee of the House of Assembly. Now, our position is, having that on the table and having negotiated that since 1999 when the committee was first set up, we should now open talks with the United Kingdom and take that forward to pursue the decolonisation of Gibraltar. I think it is a defeatist posture, really, to think that because, or to advocate that because the United Kingdom is ruling this out, or is ruling the other out, we should not pursue it. I mean, the United Kingdom wants us to do a deal with Spain. That is their position. That is the position of Peter Hain, the position of Jack Straw, the position of Tony Blair. That hasn't changed. They want to deal with Spain. We don't want to deal with Spain. What we want is what the House of Assembly is going to put forward, and that would have to be endorsed in referendum at the end of it by the people of Gibraltar to see whether they want it or not. And that would be the first time ever that any constitutional proposals agreed in Gibraltar by negotiations between Gibraltar and the United Kingdom are put to the people to express an opinion afterwards. I think
the question was about decolonisation, and I suppose in the European debate, the question is, does it decolonisation accommodate a European dimension? In other words, does it take into account the fact that we've got surrounding us the European issues? And I think the answer is that it does. It facilitates a mechanism that hopefully will allow us to be vigilant, and hopefully will allow us to avoid the confrontations, not the confrontations, at least the failures that are cast upon us inevitably by people with different interests. I think that the issue on regional selectivity and on the tax reforms generally is that Gilbert's absolutely right. It's like any of the challenges we face them continuously. It's inevitably the result of the position we are vis-a-vis Spain. We don't have the political will sometimes. We challenge them head on, we take legal proceedings, and as we have in the past, we'll be successful. We'll be successful, and if we're not successful in the areas that we'll amend, and we will still do well. I think it's important to remember, and I think this is a message that has to be taken out of this programme and generally, is that the government have made a commitment to continue the fiscal attractiveness of Gibraltar. They've even gone as far as I understand it, saying that they would abolish corporate tax if need be, and look at other ways of raising revenue, as I understand it. So the position, I think, is we are faced with another challenge. It's nothing more than we're used to. It's not as bad as a challenge we faced 2 years ago, which is talking about our sovereignty. We will face it head on. We will deliver continued financial success to clients and to people in Gibraltar, and I think that's the message certainly that we should be delivering to people in Gibraltar.
But that must be linked through the famous Plan B, which nobody actually knows
but
what
it is true.
If you're referring to your Plan B as the secret economic plan of your leader,
no,
that's the one that no one ever found out about.
Because firstly, that Plan B was actually implemented and it worked, as opposed to what's been happening over the last 10 years.
Well, it kept it very quiet. The rest of the electorate didn't realise, certainly not 96.
But Joseph, what I think is important, the message.
I really need to get on to Gilbert. We've got very little time, and Gilbert hasn't had to
the message that Nick has tried to convey, and with which I agree entirely, is one that we must be positive and not negative about this. Just because we face challenges, just because we face a possible problem, even a regional selectivity problem, that does not mean that we automatically look towards Spain as the option, or as one of the options. I discard that option completely.
But do you think that's part of the plan, to push you towards Spain? I mean,
it might be part of the wider agenda by Spain, but Spain must understand, and certainly following the massive referendum result, rejecting any deal with Spain, that it is simply not an option for us to look towards Spain for our survival or for our constitutional reform. We look towards Britain. Our relationship constitutionally is with Britain and will continue to be with Britain. Right. We've put forward certain proposals. We have to table formally those proposals and discuss them and take them to their end conclusion and have an arrangement with Britain which excludes consideration of the Spanish dimension.
We mustn't assume, I think it's an important point, we mustn't assume that all these initiatives emanating from Europe have Spain behind them, or that Spain is continuously the bogeyman. The initiatives that we're facing, the challenges that we're facing in relation to tax, are essentially competition challenges. They're challenges that are being faced by many jurisdictions in the European community. I mean, the Azores is facing a regional selectivity challenge. The Basque Country was facing a regional selectivity challenge. So these are European community.
Well, let me finish. Regions might have things looked at objectively on the merits. No. We have another factor to take into account. And if Spain, as Joseph rightly identified, if that hand of Spain is moving there in the background, and unfortunately, Spain has a hand in the European Commission. The European Commission, yes, let me. The European Commission is a political animal, and it will be used by Spain to our detriment as it has been
Absolutely, absolutely. But the reality of the situation is that state aid is a European initiative. It's affecting other member states, a lot of member states, an awful lot of member states, in fact, that are very, very concerned about the regional selectivity argument, including the United Kingdom, because of the devolution implications for the United Kingdom itself. I think that Nick touched on a very important point here, and it's this. That what we've got to be doing here is we've got to be looking forward to what other challenges may emanate from Europe, so that we are prepared as and when they arise.
To meet them.
Because last year one of the communiques that we came out with last year was in fact precisely drawing attention to what Nick has drawn in relation to the Financial Times article, which is that there are a number of former members of the Commission that have already come out publicly saying that perhaps the European Union ought to be moving towards having a floor on the rate of tax and also a ceiling. Now, the lowest level, apart from the member states that are now coming into the European Union, the lowest level of tax, I believe, is Ireland, and that's 12.5%.
Well, no,
Madeira
has just had a scheme for 1%.
Yeah, well, I'm talking
1% for certain industries.
So we then have a situation where, say, for instance, the Commission comes back and says, well, you can have a floor of 10% and a ceiling of 20, more or less, like the system in relation to VAT. Then we then have different challenges, and these have got to be at the forefront of our minds, and we've got to be prepared to meet these challenges.
We're running out of time, and I want to go round the table and end up with one thing: the European parliamentary elections and Spain's legal challenge there. Obviously, the European parliamentary elections, if we had some representation there, could we perhaps change things a lot more? And what do you think of Spain's challenge there? And I just want perhaps to
can I make one general point before that? And that is that, we've mentioned the hand of Spain, and the primary responsibility is with the United Kingdom. That is a member state that is supposed to defend Gibraltar's interests and is not doing it. And that Peter Hain spelt it out very clearly when he came here in September 2001, that if we did not go along with the plan that London and Madrid had hatched for us, then we would get left behind in Europe. That it could be that this is what is happening. Perhaps somebody needs to get official confirmation from the British government that this is what it is. But it shouldn't surprise us. I mean, we were told, we go down this route, this is what is going to happen. Now, in terms of the European election and the Spanish challenge, I think it's important.
Very briefly, please, I just want to wind up.
It's important to bear in mind what Ana Palacio and Jack Straw, or what Palacio said on the doorstep last week, this week when they had the talks, and that was that they would now take a position where they would defend Spanish interests via Gibraltar at every step of the way, and that the court challenge is simply one of those. And for us, obviously, the UK is confident that their position is robust. From a democratic point of view, it's really absolutely disgraceful that they're doing it. The UK has the recourse of defending that challenge in court. We have the recourse of writing out to MPs, getting out friends and supporters in Parliament to do that.
Are out of time.
There's already a question tabled by Andrew McKinley in the House of Commons as a result of that, and other MPs have already been in touch with me saying that they intend to take the issue forward. So really, the answer is twofold. One is legal action, the other one is political action.
Little time. All I say is that, look, we face challenges day in and day out. And this is just another stick, and the approach towards Spain, towards any agenda, whether it's Spanish, it's EU driven, is the same. Defend our position by lobbying, by using Britain to assist us when their interests are the same, and importantly when their interests are not, more importantly perhaps when their interests are not, and have confidence. I have confidence that we go forward, I think as a people, and we're doing very well.
I don't see that this particular challenge by Spain has any prospect of success. What we've done essentially is replicate the mechanism that exists in the UK for these particular elections. We've fought long and hard to gain the right to vote. We've got it, we're going to keep it, we're going to vote in June of this year.
There is absolutely no way that our right to vote is going to be overturned in the European Court of Justice. It's totally misconceived. I think that Gibraltar has shown to be extremely resilient over the last 3 decades. I feel very positive about the outlook for Gibraltar, and I just hope as well that as far as locally, that there could be more unity in the way that in the way that we tackle these issues, more consultation between government and opposition, and I would like to see the day that the Chief Minister and Mr. Bossano could be at one, meeting all these various challenges.
Well, lots of challenges, that's something that we have spoken about, but a very confident panel here. And of course the European parliamentary elections, that's a whole viewpoint in itself. From us, it's good night.